From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power with David Weston.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York to our television and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. We begin today in Brussels, and specifically with Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, who's been appearing before the European Parliament. I understand he's still there. And to bring us up to speed on exactly what he's been asking for, what the reaction's been, we turn now to Maria Tadeo. She's Bloomberg European correspondent based in Brussels. So, Maria, what do we know today that we didn't know yesterday?
Well, David, to start with, the European tour for Volodymyr Zelensky is coming to an end. He was in London, as you know, yesterday night. He was in Paris, where he met with the French president and the German chancellor. And today he is here in Brussels. Now, just to stress it for an international audience, coming here to Brussels, yes, it was a security risk for the Ukrainian president. But at the same time, this is a special place to some extent. You have the heads of 27 different countries gathered here, the heads of all of the big institutions here. And also you sent a message to the entire Europe. And that was a goal for Volodymyr Zelensky, to speak to Europeans, to say you have to stand with Ukraine. There is fatigue, but for us, we don't have a day off. The war continues. Now, on the logistics, he was very clear that Ukraine needs weapons, and they need weapons for two reasons. They expect Russia to enact some form of, quote, revenge of the country, coinciding, obviously, with the one-year mark of the invasion, but also they worry about the spring offensive that may be to come. And for that, he repeated, I need long-range missiles, and I will need to fighter jets. It's not clear he's coming home with that on paper. He did say there was some good work in the right direction, but nothing on the specifics. And then lastly, very European, but nonetheless very important for Ukraine, is the candidacy status to become an EU member. For Ukraine, this has become everything. He insisted once again, this is something they want to get serious about and start talks soon. The question is, can a country that is at war obviously do the reforms that entail membership of the European Union?
Maria, thank you very much for that comprehensive report. That's Bloomberg's Maria Tadeo reporting from Brussels. And we turn now to somebody who knows this issue terribly well. He's Stavros Lambrinidis, European Union Ambassador to the United States. So, Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for being with us. Let's pick up on that candidacy issue here. Give us the report on where the status that is. How fast could it get done, if in fact it gets done at all?
Well, David, thanks for having me. It's great to see you. What you see today in Brussels may appear extraordinary, this visit, but in fact, it will become quite normal in the next few years, and that's a very, very unique characteristic of this relationship. Ukraine wants to be a country that belongs to the European Union, and the European Union has made a decision that Ukraine will be a member of the European Union and is already a member of the European family. They're fighting and they're dying for those ideals that the European Union was built on. So the prospect is there, the candidacy is there, and the work is ahead of us. But as the European Commission President said and the European Council President said, the efforts Ukraine is doing during the war are remarkable. Whether it is about being able to keep their economy alive, a very resilient economy with Russia trying to bomb it to rubble in addition to the buildings, whether it is the young people in Ukraine, the young generation, the education they have, the tremendous economic opportunities, whether it is a fight against corruption that they're engaged in very effectively for a while now, all these are signs that Ukraine is on a very, very hopeful path for European integration. This is a process that is merit-based. It's not, the European Union is not a social club, of course, and the Ukrainians know that very well. And we are tremendously impressed by the work that they have done already, and we look forward to supporting them throughout this process.
Let me go to the ultimate question and perhaps assume that they did become a regular member of the European Union. How would that change what's going on with Russia right now? Would it strengthen their position? And if so, how?
Well, being a member of the European Union would obviously give them a tremendous advantage when it comes to, being integrated in the single market. The economy will boom substantially. They will be able to receive investments much more easily from everywhere in the world, including the United States and other places. And of course, the security that the European Union gives to its members, the sense of belonging not just to an economic powerhouse, but also to a powerhouse of values, that sticks by those values, they're not nice to have things for us, is something that the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian youth are looking forward to. So it's going to be a game changer.
So, Mr. Ambassador, you mentioned the issue of corruption before this invasion by Russia of Ukraine. I'll say Ukraine did not have necessarily the best reputation on dealing with how they manage their economy. How much progress have they made? How much more do they need to make?
Well, look, they already have a law in place, and no one else has such a law in place in the neighborhood for a few years now to curtail the power of oligarchs in Ukraine. And you can see now, in the middle of the war, when one might say, well, let's not rock the boat, they are, out there, making sure that all the aid that we give them gets distributed correctly, arresting people who may be, corrupting that support or using other kind of corruption. Their prosecutor, as they're looking at day and night with our support at the war crimes that Russia is committing and collecting the evidence, they are at the same time making sure that corruption is being addressed. So, of course, it's a long road. It's not an easy road. But I am very hopeful given the commitment that they're showing.
Mr. Ambassador, is the United States asking for further and additional sanctions against Russia from the EU?
Well, the United States doesn't have to ask for that. We are imposing our sanctions in lockstep with the United States in most cases, and we are, in fact, quite ahead. You cannot defy gravity. We are next to Russia. The sanctions we're imposing have, in every single package, a much bigger effect on the Russian economy, but also on the EU economy, a negative effect, just because our level of trade and investment has been so much higher. But that didn't stop us at all from imposing just now an additional ban on refined petroleum products, which of course is going to have an influence, and a serious one, at the gas pump in Europe, in European member states. But we understand that the price of freedom is high. And in Europe you need, keep in mind, 27 leaders to sign unanimously any sanctions package for it to go through. It's not like in the US, a president just has to say something. I can guarantee you that Putin was betting that at least one or two of the member states would not agree to take the side of sanctions. And that was one more miscalculation that he's made. His economy now is suffering because of European and American sanctions massively. His military machine cannot produce the weapons that he would need, and he's reaching out to the Iranians and to the North Koreans and to others to get them. He is in real trouble.
Yeah. Mr. Ambassador, we can't talk to you without asking about Turkey and the tragedy that's unfolding right now in southeast Turkey. Exactly what is the EU doing to try to help Turkey? I know this is terribly important to you.
Oh, it's supremely important, and we came out directly. I did so here in this country, of course, as the EU ambassador, but our leaders back in Brussels as well. Not just expressing condolences, but mobilizing the mechanism that we have in Europe, the civil protection mechanism, which involves support that is given to us by cooperating countries as well. Around 35 countries are in that mechanism. So we are collecting right now and sending to Turkey everything that we can to support its people. It's a terrible, terrible tragedy. A terrible tragedy. I can't really imagine, what they're going through. And my condolences go directly to the people of Turkey, everyone who's lost loved ones, but everyone in Turkey as well.
Yeah, and I know many of us, all of us in the United States, really share those sentiments. One last subject, a bit different subject, and that's EV tax credits, which has been an issue under the Inflation Reduction Act, an issue between the European Union on the one hand and the United States on the other. Can you give us any sense of any discussions ongoing, and is there any room for maneuver that you're determining on the U.S. side? There is a statute. It's kind of hard to just disregard that, but is there any movement toward a resolution of that?
Yes, there is. We have set up a task force to address exactly that issue, and already in late December 2022, the U.S. administration announced an interpretation of the law that makes those discriminatory provisions, reduces their negative effect on Europe and the rest of the world. But we are still discussing issues such as batteries and critical minerals and the provisions that require that only if they're done in the U.S. can they be used in a car that takes the credit, because fundamentally this is what it boils down to. we cannot produce everything that we want. We each want to support our industries, it goes down saying, but we can't, even if we want to produce everything that we want in-house. So we have to import. And the question is, who do we import from? We Europeans, you Americans. Do we import from our biggest allies in the world, which is each other? Or do we retain our dependencies on countries that we do not want to be dependent on? So if you take that simple premise, it is the supply chains and the value chains that have to be bolstered as we both try to move to greener technologies, including EVs. And to the extent that we can ensure that the Inflation Reduction Act does not have negative consequences there, to the extent that we can ensure that there's transparency so that, we do not compete on subsidies, we compete on quality, that will make a difference. David, just one thing there, I think is important. We give incentives in Europe as well for the e-vehicles, but we do not discriminate between European and other car makers. Result, in Germany today, the biggest seller of EVs is Tesla. It's not BMW, it's not Volkswagen. And that's great for the European economy. It's not hurting us. It is allowing us to be able to get as many and as cheap as possible EVs on the roads to make sure we deal with the CO2 emissions. But it's also getting our companies to compete better, to be faster, to try to beat each other, if you like, in a fair competition. That's what American and European open economies are about, and that's what we should be aiming for.
It's a terribly important perspective. Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. That's Stavros Lambrinidis. He's European Union Ambassador to the United States. Coming up, in the wake of President Biden's State of the Union address, we talk with former Secretary of Energy Ernest Moniz about U.S. energy policy, particularly in the wake of Russia's war in Ukraine. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. One of the topics, I dare say, controversial topics addressed by President Biden at his State of the Union address was U.S. energy policy and the extent to which we will remain dependent upon fossil fuels such as oil. For a view on where we are in the transition away from fossil fuels, we welcome now Ernest Moniz. He's former U.S. Energy Secretary. He's now President and CEO of Energy Futures Initiative, as well as, I believe, Professor of Physics at MIT. So, Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for being back with us. Give us your best sense about this transition away from fossil fuels, and most particularly, given your expertise, the role of nuclear in that.
Okay, thanks, David. Well, first of all, as you kind of alluded to, the president did mention that we would have continued oil and gas dependence, and that is evidently the case. Certainly, the situation in Germany, for example, stimulated by the Ukraine invasion of Russia, has highlighted that fact, as they've had to kind of scramble to build LNG import terminals. They're unfortunately using more coal and the like. So we will face the same thing. However, we are moving quite smartly to develop the new energy economy, if you like, based upon low carbon technologies and zero carbon technologies. The Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, and the infrastructure law that preceded it have both given an enormous jumpstart in this direction. For example, actually this morning, our organization released a report on hydrogen. Those bills have given a tremendous jumpstart to establishing a hydrogen economy, which can be very low carbon. But on the other hand, the president also said something very much in resonance with that particular report, namely, we have a job to finish, and let's finish it. So we've taken some great strides. The IRA will have very beneficial effects while lowering the deficit, but we have much more to do. Nuclear, you mentioned, is one example. There's a lot of new technology, both nuclear fission, where we split uranium like today, and potentially nuclear fusion, where we bring small atoms, nuclei together to create energy. There's been an unprecedented amount of innovation going on in both areas. A lot of private money has come in to this, $5 billion just in fusion, for example. So somebody thinks this has a real good shot of working and being a major part of the low carbon future. But once again, we have to finish the job. That will include, for example, a lot of risk reduction so that private capital can flow and get the kinds of returns that private capital seeks. But those technologies are moving along well. We expect to have some construction of smaller reactors, probably in this decade, certainly this decade and early in the next decade. And that will be a big part, we think, of the low carbon future.
Talking about the here and now and fission before fusion here, do you have a view on banning imports from Russia of uranium and enriched fuel? Because there is a lot of talk about that.
Yeah, I think eventually that will go into effect. But to be honest, this is one of the cases today where we simply need to import some of the enrichment services that Russia performs. So I think the issue is in having a glide path whereby we dramatically improve our own supply chain for nuclear technologies. And by the way, that's not only to meet our commercial nuclear power needs, but also our national security needs for nuclear weapons and for naval ships, submarines, and aircraft carriers. Right now, we cannot meet our national security needs. So I think we need a comprehensive administration, congressional condominium on how we are going to build our supply chain out. I'll give you an example in the civilian sector, whereby we have for a long time not have had in this country the major capabilities to forge large vessels like pressure vessels for nuclear reactors. We need to rebuild this if we are going to become both a low carbon economy and an export powerhouse again for these nuclear technologies.
Mr. Secretary, I don't want to let you leave without addressing something I know you've been very involved in. That's nuclear proliferation, arms control issues. I saw in the newspapers last week, actually, that now it appears that Russia has suspended inspection under the New START treaty. Give us a sense of the significance of that. As I understand, that's the last arms control agreement in effect with Russia. Is that correct?
Correct. It's very significant. We've had continuous arms control agreements for now over 50 years with first the Soviet Union and now Russia. We're down to one called the New START Treaty. It limits the number of deployed so-called strategic weapons launchers. It allows for up to 18 inspections per year to verify the numbers. Understandably, suspensions of the inspections during the COVID crisis was one thing, but now it's time to restart. The United States and Russia had a meeting scheduled to restart the inspections. The Russians walked out. They're linking it to Ukraine. This is a terrible mistake. It not only prevents or creates erosion of our confidence in compliance. We do think, by the way, they are complying still with the numbers of weapons deployed, but that confidence will erode over time, obviously. But secondly, very important, this treaty will expire early in 2026. If we do not resolve this inspection issue, it's not going to be credibly possible to have the negotiations for a successor that guarantees strategic stability. So this is a very, very serious issue. We obviously hope that Russia will reconsider this and start the dialogue to initiate inspections.
Mr. Secretary, it's always a pleasure and really beneficial to talk with you. That's Ernest Moniz. He's Energy Futures Initiative President and CEO. Coming up, the Treasury yield curve inversion has gone further than any time since the 1980s. We're going to get an update on the markets next with Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle. That's coming up on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
Earning Earnings season is here.
Big banks, that was the big story.
From the big banks to big tech.
Everybody is losing a lot of money.
It's a question of how high the bar is set.
Bloomberg breaks the numbers first.
A blockbuster number.
Blowing through estimates.
These guys are minting money.
With exclusive expert analysis.
Does this approach make sense to you?
We're going to have to make an acquisition.
This quickly become just a really crappy business model.
I don't think their business is as broken as the world thinks.
Bloomberg Television and Radio. The fastest numbers and analysis you trust.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. It's time now to get a check on the markets. For that, we turn to Abigail Doolittle. How are we doing, Abigail?
Well, it's interesting. We're off the highs. The roller coaster of this week, it continues. And at this point on the week, we're down ever so slightly. But earlier, for the S&P 500, we had been up more than 1%, or actually a little bit less than 1%. Now we're up about 0.3%. The other indexes in a similar footing. And I don't think that there's anything too specific on the day driving this volatility. I think that what we're doing is what we've been talking about all week, waiting on that CPI print next week, treading water ahead of it. But instead of it being small moves ahead of that, we're making pretty big swings.
Have we moved away from the Fed for the moment? Because there were an awful lot of people from the Fed talking yesterday.
Yeah, there's a lot of Fed
speak. Yeah,
yes, it was. And I think net, the idea is that they are reiterating the idea that they are still in hiking mode, that target rate is somewhere between 5 and 5.4%. I don't think we're away from the Fed because we are waiting for that CPI print. If that comes in higher, if it quote unquote misses, then you could really see that terminal rate and yields go higher. If it comes in line or to the downside, then maybe you could have a bit of a continuation of the risk rally that we have going on this year.
We also have the dollar weakening a bit today.
We do. We have that dollar down about 0.3%. And from a technical perspective, earlier this week, it made a stab at the 50-day moving average, but resistance pushed in, the sellers pushed in. If that continues, if the downtrend for the dollar continues out of last September, it suggests that we could see risk assets rally because, of course, they're denominated in the dollars. And when the dollar weakens, that's just a natural tailwind.
And you know I'm going to ask you about earnings because there's this push and pull going on. Certainly Disney is up, partly because they beat on revenue, but also their restructuring has really made the street like them for the moment.
Yeah, the restructuring there, that's the big deal. I mean, it's one of the first earnings reports that I can remember in a long time. It really wasn't about the number. It was about the color. And those numbers, those restructuring numbers, cost-cutting numbers laid out by Bob Iger, also talking about the idea that they will be laying people off. But it has more to do with taking away what Bob Chapek had put in place, the previous CEO, a division, an entertainment division that they are renaming the entertainment division. A lot of the employees with that old one being taken away. It's interesting, though, because that proxy fight with Nelson Peltz, that's out of the way because Nelson Peltz basically got everything he wanted. He got the cost cuts, and Bob Iger is going to talk to the board about reinstating a modest dividend.
Yeah, sort of clearing the decks. Thank you so much to Abigail Doolittle for that report on the markets. Coming up, we're going to talk the debt ceiling showdown and the outlook for small business with Congressman Roger Williams of Texas. That's still ahead on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. To keep you up to date with news from all around the world, we turn now to Lisa Mateo here with the first word.
Thank you, David. In Brussels, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says he'll ask EU leaders to send him fighter planes to fight against Russia. Zelensky is in Belgium for an EU summit. He's also urging expanded sanctions against Russia, including against missile and drone production. Thousands of foreign aid workers have arrived in Turkey, and the first UN aid convoy has entered Syria after weeks of devastating earthquakes. More than 20,000 people are confirmed dead, with thousands more still missing. Turkey has passed a 3-month state of emergency in the affected regions. The State Department says the alleged Chinese spy balloon that flew over the U.S. was capable of collecting communication signals. An official also says it was part of a broader Chinese intelligence gathering operation that covered more than 40 countries. U.S. spy planes that flew past the balloon were said to detect an array of surveillance equipment. And top Republican donors are trying to choke off any momentum that Donald Trump might try to build for a third run for the White House. Both the Anti-Tux Club for Growth and the Donor Network, founded by billionaire Charles Koch and his late brother David, have indicated they want someone other than Trump to run in 2024. So far, the former president is the only declared candidate. Former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley is expected to announce her run next week. Global news powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Lisa Mateo. This is Bloomberg. David.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Well, we all know that President Biden delivered his State of the Union address on Tuesday, and there's a fair amount about the economy in there, good, bad, indifferent, including the question of that debt ceiling and whether, in fact, we would renege on our obligations as the United States of America. To take us out through what he saw in that speech, we welcome now Republican Representative Roger Williams from Texas, who is chairman of the House Small Business Committee and a member of the House Financial Services Committee. So, Mr. Congressman, thank you so much for being with us. It's really valuable to get the perspective of a small businessman here. But when it comes to the debt ceiling, give us some sense of how we're going to get through this, because everybody seems to agree we want to get through it, we have to get through it, but I can't quite see the path right now.
Well, look, we got a serious problem with the debt. To me, at $31 trillion, it's the biggest it's the biggest concern I have for our country. And I'm concerned about the interest on the debt. As a small business owner that still owns a business, I know how interest can choke a business. And we've got to find a way to reduce our interest costs. Of course, you do that by paying down on your principal. The interesting thing about our interest, though, we keep having the interest rate increases. So if we start reducing principal and we raise interest rates, we're still going to be at the same place. So it's going to be very important we identify what we can cut, what principal balances can we cut and reduce, and begin to reduce this interest. And the interest is going to have to slow down because, like I say, every time they raise interest, it costs us more money. And that's the biggest concern I have from a small business owner. We can do all this conversation about what if, this and that. At the end of the day, we got to reduce interest costs.
So as a small business owner, you know this well. I've managed budgets as well. It's easy to say you're going to cut. It's harder actually to do it. It really takes some stamina to get that done. We haven't seen much of that in Washington, I don't think, recently. Where would you cut? And is it unreasonable for President Biden to say, give me a list, Republicans, of what you want to cut?
Well, I think, first of all, he has to be willing to negotiate, which is what it appears he may be able to do. Speaker of the House, McCarthy, did a great job in talking to him last week. But when you start talking about cutting, I mean, you have to, like a business sits down, you have to look at everything. But I think, there's areas out there, for example, in our Small Business Committee, we have the purview of the SBA. As you know, just several weeks ago, we found out that $85 billion was mismanaged through idle funds and so forth. We need to go collect that. That could go, again, to the debt. I hear all the time about all the land that the government owns across the country, and some of that's not even being used. Why not take a look at some of that and see if we can't sell some real estate like businesses do, get cash in the bank and put it against the debt? So we need to think out of the box, and nobody's talking about Social Security and Medicare. That's out. But we need to think out of the box on, like I just said, like things we can do to reduce that. To reduce the principal, so reduce the interest cost.
Yeah, that Social Security and Medicare got a bit of a dust up there on the floor, but I understand that we already had Mr. McCarthy, the speaker, saying we're not going to really mess with that. At the same time, I went back and looked today to confirm something I thought. We've gone past the point now where 50% of all Americans get some form of federal assistance, one form or the other. That includes Social Security. It goes well beyond that. Are you concerned as a small businessman that if we took a lot of those, not entitlements, the discretionary away, it could affect your business down in Texas?
Well, anytime the government gets out of your life, it's good for small business. Okay, we just want to live off competition. We want to be able to have regulations that we can afford. I mean, you got regulations right now. When the Biden administration, when they came in, brought $300 billion worth of regulations to Main Street America, and it's taken 120 million man hours to deal with it. So that's money being sucked out of Main Street, sucked out of small business. That could be going to research and development, could be going to hire more people, could be going to put more equipment in their businesses. So, the less government is the best government, and hopefully we can head that direction. I've always said I want government to do three things: collect my taxes, defend my borders, and help me with infrastructure, and get out of my life.
So you said you're hopeful that we're going to have a negotiation in Washington. We're going to get this resolved. We're not going to actually jeopardize the full faith and credit of the United States government. I'm sorry to ask this, but I have to ask, do you have any guess about when that happens? Because there's a lot of sense that Congress isn't going to do anything until they're really right at the edge of something bad.
Well, the biggest problem with these debt ceiling increases, you're exactly right. They always wait right to the end, to a weekend or something like that, and they rush something through. Small businesses don't do that. Small businesses plan. Main Street America's plans, and I think under the leadership of Speaker McCarthy, we're already talking about it. It's good that we're talking about it now, so we don't have this crisis build up as we get closer to May and June. I hope that's the way it works out, and that we do have a plan on adjustments that we can make. But with me, it all gets back to interest expense. How are you going to reduce the interest expense? What principal payments you're going to make, because we're competing against the Fed. When they're raising rates, we're trying to lower rates, and that's a problem right now. And it kind of reminds me of 1981 all over again.
So, Representative, I want to talk about something else that I know is of concern to you and to other business people across the country, and that is the burden of regulation. And what you would describe as excess regulation. I mean, I think we all agree there's got to be some regulation. The question is how much and where it is. But as you, as a small businessman down in Texas, what are the regulations that come out of Washington that really affect your business, affect your bottom line?
Well, the regulations, I mean, I talked earlier about the $300 billion worth of regulations that have been proposed on Main Street America. But, you know, the debt is a big reason. I mean, the debt means more. Look, the debt does not have Main Street America. It creates problems with interest, but also it makes the government talk about raising taxes. 87,000 IRS agents, we got that fixed, but that was a scare for small business. But anytime you start talking about raising taxes, and you watch Biden on TV the other day, he talked about raising taxes, and that scares the heck out of Main Street America. We need to cut taxes. We need the Trump tax cuts to stay the same, make them permanent, so we can keep more money in our businesses, hire more people, do more things to help customers, and create inventories if we can ever get a supply chain going.
So you know the way Washington works and also the way financial markets work. And I don't want to be cynical, but maybe I'll be a little skeptical here. When I look back and the last time Washington actually addressed some of the issues you're talking about, I think it was actually in the 1990s. And it wasn't because Washington decided to do it. It's because the bond market was sending a very strong message, those bond vigilantes. Do you think Washington has the wherewithal to decide on its own to get its financial house in order? Or is it going to require going up to the point where actually the markets are dictating to the Congress?
No, I think Washington does. I think on both sides you realize this is not sustainable. You look at the interest right now. The interest on $32 trillion is I'm not sure about almost as much as the GDP. And we have more cash flow going through our country now we've ever had. You've seen those numbers. You've talked about the numbers, but we're also spending more. So the bottom line is it's pretty simple mathematics. You got X coming in. You need to spend less than that. You create a net worth, you create a margin, you create a country that's a good business operation, and it's just what it is. It's a business, needs to be run like that. But I think that we do have the wherewithal to get it done. The leadership of McCarthy is driving that, and people like myself, we want to get it done. We have to get it done because this interest is going to just chew us up to where we have no military, we have nothing if we don't get our house in order. And it's our charge. I mean, we can be possibly a world's greatest generation if we can fix this debt and begin to reduce the debt. If we could just reduce it $1 trillion a year, we could be even in 31 years.
Congressman, it's really valuable to get your insights into these things. That's Republican Congressman Roger Williams from Texas. Coming up, we're going to talk with Avril Benoit. She is U.S. Executive Director for Doctors Without Borders about the relief efforts after the devastating earthquakes that hit Turkey and Syria. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. The world has looked on with horror as the aftermath of those Turkey earthquakes, and also Syria, I should not exclude, have really come home to roost. We now turn to somebody who is involved in some of the rescue and recovery efforts. She's Avril Benoit. She's U.S. Executive Director of Doctors Without Borders. So, Avril, thank you so much for being back. This last time it was Ukraine. Now it's Turkey, Syria. Give us a sense of what Doctors Without Borders is doing over there now.
Well, the focus for us is really to make sure that we can leverage our emergency response capacity, our expertise, all the years that we have been developing this logistical capacity, not to mention the medical expertise to be able to respond. So we have teams in both countries, but really for us, the heavy lift is in northwest Syria, where the hospitals are overwhelmed. They are still pulling people out of the rubble. obviously a lot of dead. And so the teams that we already had there, roughly 500 staff of Doctors Without Borders, who were supporting numerous hospitals, really in Idlib and in Aleppo, in those regional districts, also some mobile clinics and other small areas of support. We immediately redeployed everybody to be able to support the hospitals for the earthquake and try to save as many lives as we can.
So bring us up to speed, because I've lost track of this now. Is there an effective government in those areas at this point? Is Mr. Assad still in charge there?
Well, this is not a Damascus controlled area, and that is one of the reasons that we have been working since the last 12 years of the war to be able to respond there. So we are able to function there. We have a long-standing experience, and as I say, our staff who have been on the ground. Now, tragically, 2 of our colleagues died in the earthquake. And so in addition to the immense burden and sense of responsibility that we have toward their families, of those individuals, we have many other colleagues there who have lost loved ones, whose own homes have been destroyed, and who are now trying to do the best they can to alleviate the suffering in their communities.
Well, I'm very sorry for your loss and their losses. That's very sad to hear. There's so much tragedy over there right now. What do you need most? Is it people? Is it supplies? And where are they coming from?
Generally speaking, we are using the emergency stocks that we already had on site in our warehouses, which thankfully were not damaged. And so we've been able to distribute enough non-food items, so tents, hygiene kits, also medical kits to various hospital structures for the surgeries. We've been able to provide some supplies for something like 25,000 people in different areas of Afrin area, and we are looking to bring in more supplies into northwest Syria, and that is one of the reasons that it's critically important for that access road, the one UN-sanctioned or permitted road to be able to bring supplies from Turkey into northwest Syria. We are advocating for it to be open and remain open, because that'll be key. The local provisions are limited. There's only so much you can buy on the local market. And so it's important for that international aid effort to be able to bring in the supplies that we need.
Ms. Benoit, what about U.S. support? What kind of U.S. support are we getting? President Biden went to Madison, Wisconsin yesterday, and he actually addressed the issue. This is part of what he had to say.
The United States is a leading donor across all the areas of Syria, no matter who controls the territory. It's about saving human life. We remain steadfast in our commitment to supporting the people of Turkey and Syria in this time of need.
So what are you seeing in terms of the U.S. presence and support over there thus far?
Well, as you may know, Doctors Without Borders is independently funded. We don't take government funding from the U.S. And this is one of the reasons that we are able to work with impartiality. We're not perceived as having any sort of political agenda. And so with the private funding that we already have in hand from our general emergency funds, this is what allows us to function. So I can't really say specifically for the U.S. government response, because we really do try to keep that sort of impartiality and independence, which allows us to gain the trust in areas that are so politicized, as you can imagine it is in northwest Syria.
Often Americans are pretty generous when these things come up, but I suppose it varies crisis to crisis. What are you seeing so far in response in terms of donations coming in to your organization?
It really has been heartening. I think people know that we have the credibility and the experience and the capacity to be quite a strong supporter of the needs of the people in these zones. And so really for us, it's that sustained giving, the monthly giving, the unearmarked giving that allows us, whenever there is an emergency like this, to pivot and respond quickly. Although I know that a lot of people are contacting us and saying, we really want to give for this earthquake, and maybe specifically for Turkey, for example. What we try to convey to them is that if there is another major disaster in a neighboring country, they would also want us to be able to react quickly there. And so that's why it's so important for the action-oriented organization that we are, that we try to convey that monthly giving is really the best. Undesignated, unearmarked gives us the greatest flexibility to be the most effective.
This has been very helpful. Really appreciate you taking time at a very busy time for you. That's Avril Benoit. She is U.S. Executive Director of Doctors Without Borders. Coming up, Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman's new health scare. We'll have an update from Washington. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. You'll be relieved to know that Congress is getting out of town. They've had a hard time of it so far, so they're going to take a recess. To bring us up to speed on what Congress has been up to, we turned on a Washington correspondent, Joe Matthew. He's host of Sound On weekdays on Bloomberg Radio. So I want to talk about what Congress has been doing. First, just a note on John Fetterman, the new senator, Democratic senator from Pennsylvania, because I'm told he went back into the hospital. Do we know anything about it?
That's right. He spent the night there, David. John Fetterman said he was feeling lightheaded at a Democratic retreat here in Washington yesterday. He called his staff. They drove him to George Washington University Hospital, and they did keep him there for the night. His office released a statement saying initial tests did not show evidence of a new stroke, which is really the news here. Doctors, though, are running more tests. They say he was in good spirits, talking with staff and family. But it's noteworthy, David, after his health became such a major issue on the campaign trail last year following his stroke, which required him, remember, to use closed captioning at his debate with Dr. Oz and for some interviews. The last official word that we heard from his doctor was a letter that was released in October. And it said he had no work restrictions, can work fully in full duty in public office, it reads. But there will clearly be more demand for testing results, David, and those will likely take a couple of days.
Yeah, well, we all wish him well, I know. So, Joe, let's come back to the Congress that's going on recess. And I somewhat cynically ask, what have they done? But I guess they've had some hearings thus far, right? Some oversight hearings, some Judiciary Committee hearings.
Well, that's true. Look, Republicans promised a new level of oversight and accountability, a series of investigations, and they are very much making good on those promises. Today, it's the first hearing of the House Judiciary Select Committee on the weaponization of the federal government. Congressman Jim Jordan holding forth here as they look into sort of Republican accusations that the FBI has been biased and suppressing conservative voices and, in fact, suppressing the Hunter Biden laptop story. And we heard a bit about that yesterday as well. The House Oversight Committee held a hearing about Twitter specifically, brought Twitter executives before the panel and again, investigated what they see as bias, silencing conservative voices and not allowing conservatives to pursue the Hunter Biden laptop, suggesting that they suppressed this. Marjorie Taylor Greene, the congresswoman, of course, from Georgia on that committee, berated executives from Twitter in this hearing. Here's a taste.
You can consider your speech canceled during my time because you canceled mine. You see, you permanently banned my personal Twitter account, and it was my campaign account also. So let's talk about election interference, shall we?
This went on for some time. For what it's worth, the executive said, David, that they never received requests from the government to conduct any specific behavior or suppress specifically the Hunter Biden laptop story. Now, you did sound a little bit skeptical, and I have to be honest with you. You know, it depends who you talk to in Washington about the time best spent here. Last evening, this all came to a fore. There were some jokes at what was the 77th annual Washington Press Club Foundation dinner, holding forth in this instance, Congresswoman Nancy Mace, a Republican, poking fun at Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was in the room. Listen.
Recently, there's been a lot of talk about anti-Semitism, but since Marjorie Taylor Greene started behaving, the rate of Jewish space laser attacks is now 0. Good job, Marjorie. Good job. There we go. We're all cheering you on there.
Ouch.
So, again, this is a Republican who's making the jokes here. And by the way, her jokes were more cutting than those that we heard from Senator Chuck Schumer. But it's interesting. I was on the other side of the room, David. I understand that Marjorie Taylor Greene did laugh at a lot of the jokes last night, but it gives you a sense of kind of the state of affairs here as this new Congress gets going in Washington.
And that's Republican on Republican, as I understand it.
That's correct.
Not even across the aisle. But in fairness, they haven't had that much time in the 118th Congress. So let me ask a somewhat different question. Do we know what the Speaker's agenda is, what he'd like to get done, other than looking into Hunter Biden's laptop? Not to say he shouldn't, but that doesn't seem like a really big accomplishment.
Well, look, that's true. And he likes to say that we can walk and chew gum at the same time, that we will pursue new policies and conduct what they see as important oversight. simultaneously here. Look, the real agenda, David, is going to be writing a budget. There's not likely going to be a lot of legislation that gets through this new Congress here. But when it comes to writing a budget and avoiding the debt ceiling, nothing is more important to Speaker McCarthy or this White House.
Yeah, and that deficit and debt is growing, actually. Thank you so much to Bloomberg's Joe Matthew. You want to listen to him today, 5 o'clock Eastern Time on Sound On. And that does it for Balance of Power. We're going to continue on Bloomberg Radio. Join us there. This is Bloomberg.